So getting into the use cases and why we selected these four. So there's four different use cases we're going to be looking at. There's I'm going to call it xECM just to shorten the whole name, but xECM service being down. The a full text indexing issue, an issue around backend performance, and also looking at volumes within xECM. So how much space we have left and when we're dropping below a specific level. And the reason we selected these are basically when we've worked with clients, they're the four that often come up. There's multiple different use cases we cover and multiple things we test for. And you can, again, if you look on the chat within the meeting, you'll see that there's a document that covers all the different tests we do for xECM. But when we've worked with clients, these are specifically of interest because it's the areas that those clients have seen issues with. And we've seen that happen again and again. So they're the ones we've focused on. So the first one, the xECM service being down. So this is pretty simple. We can see a drop off in performance. We see the services being down in some instances. So we're testing for that service. And we can also see that users are having access issues. So it's not just about the service. It's basically looking at multiple different elements that point towards the service either being unavailable. So in other words, the service is up and running, or alternatively, the services seems to be running, but it's not processing the data in the way we'd expect. So there's two scenarios there. The service is completely down, or the service is up, but it's not doing what we'd expect it would. Now, again, if we look at Reveille here, the screen you can see here are the monitors that we're covering from an OpenText point of view. Obviously, we can cover multiple systems. So it could be extended ECM, it could be intelligent capture, or capture as it's now known, but we could also have other systems in here as well. So it might be that you're using the extended ECM backend, but for capture using something like ABI FlexiCapture or IBM DataCap. So this can cover your whole ECM environment. Now, if we drill down into and the color represents the state of this particular environment. Now, if we drill down into extended ECM, you can see the administrator is having a bad day. There's multiple different elements that are going wrong here and they're being flagged up. Hopefully you won't have a system where you'll see all of these issues at the same time. But from a demo point of view and looking at these use cases, I've triggered all of these issues so we can see what it will look like. Now, from a platform point of view, you can see here that it's checking the service and the service is unavailable. That's a Sev1 issue. That's the color represents the severity because basically the service is unavailable and potentially that might mean that users can't access the system at all. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. You may have load balancing, but maybe just one service being down. But in this instance, we've classified that as a Sev1 issue, and you can decide what severity each different issue you're encountering is. So in some stages, it might be just a warning. In some instances, it could be a Sev3 or Sev4. In this instance, it's a Sev1 that we need to deal with within a specific period of time. Now, when I've got this Sev1 issue, all the right people have been notified. It's come through to the administrator, but it could also go through to the management team as well, because they want to be aware if there's a Sev1 issue, because that has a fundamental impact on the business. Now, in this instance, this Sev1 issue has sent out a notification. It's let me know there's something happening. If I go into our dashboards and open up my extended ECM performance, we can also see how that's affecting the backend systems. When we run a test against the environment for a service, it's really just telling us if it's available or not available. But if we're looking at things like performance, looking at task queues, how system activity, the number of sessions on the system, they're gathering data. And this we can see on the screen at the moment, this visualization tool is called a Reveille dashboard, and it's showing us exactly what's happening in the backend environment. And we'll come back to that because some of the other use cases are presented here as well. So we know that the service is down. We can see that we've been flagged up, and it could be in multiple ways that we're picking up that service is down. It doesn't have to be the service is unavailable. It might not be processing the data in the way we expect. So what do we do about that in that instance? So Reveille has what we call proactive actions. So if you think about when that error occurs, what do we need to do to resolve that issue? Now, the interface I've brought up here is the Reveille admin client. This shows us how we set up the system, how we define that monitor, and then how do we find the resources, and then how do we define the tests within these resources. So this is the one that's actually checking for that backend service. This is the test that we're looking at there. But what we also want to do is look at the actual proactive action that's going to be carried out when we encounter this particular issue. So I go to platform. You can see down at the bottom here we have proactive actions. And in this instance, what we're doing is going to restart the xECM service. So it's going to, when it encounters the problem, it's going to restart that service. And as I said, it doesn't have to be that the service is down. It could be multiple different things that are indicating that the service needs to be restarted. But once we see those issues, we restart that service and the issue is resolved. Now, the next problem was full text indexing. Again, the service may be running, but if we look at the dashboard, in this instance, we can see that the full text indexing count is not being processed in the way we'd expect. So you can see the full text queue, and we can see it's hovering around 700. What we've told the system to do is if the number of documents to be indexed goes above a certain level, flag that, because we've seen this issue before. And again, we need to do something about it. So again, the administrator's been notified of the issue, that there's a full text indexing issue. And again, this can be, you define the severity. It might just be a warning. But in some instances, if the document's not being indexed, the users can't find it, so they will think it's unavailable. Even though it's in the system, it's not being indexed, so they can't find it when they run searches. So it may be hindering the business from carrying out an activity, processing a document, processing a workflow. So again, it could be a SEV2 or even a SEV1 issue if required. Now, in this instance, what do we do? Well, again, we want to restart another service. In this instance, at the start of the standard xECM service, we want to restart the indexing service. So again, if we go back into the monitor, you can look down here. We've got a resource called search, so we can see that's been flagged up here. And if we go into that resource and open that up, we can see that the search queue is flagging up the issue. So again, it's telling us that it's not processing, it's evaluating that backend metric, and it's telling us we need to do something about it. So if I go into the search here, I can see in this instance, we're going to restart the xECM indexing service. So again, as soon as that's flagged up, the system's automatically restarting the service. And then we should see, when we look back in the dashboard, there'll be a drop off of the number of items in the queue, and it'll start processing them normally again. The next one's just general performance. We're going to look at, what happens if, like, for the end user, maybe the performance is dropping off, or maybe we're running an activity on the system and we're checking performance, and we can see that there's general drop off in performance in the backend system. So again, if we go back into our dashboard, we can see here that we have average transaction performance, and we can see it's dropping below in some instances, but it is going above the average transaction time of 4 seconds. And we can see that's flagged up here. Now, it could be an individual transaction we're looking at. It could be an average transaction time. It could be a login time, a search time, whatever is required in here. And we're gathering this data in a couple of different ways. We could be running tests, carrying out those actions to test how long they're taking, but we're also looking at transactions the end users are carrying out in the system as well. So we can say, right, how long is it taking on average to run a search for an end user? And then we can average that out and say if it's going above a certain level, we know that that's indicative of an issue developing on the system. So we want to flag that up. Now, how do we handle this? Well, there's multiple different ways. In this instance, we're going to do something slightly different. Rather than just restarting a service or potentially running a proactive job or maybe kicking off a PowerShell script, we're going to do something slightly different in this instance. What we're going to do is we're going to notify the admin team there's a problem, and we're also going to send the management team a KPI report. So to checking how the system is performing, it could be key performance indicating report, it could be an SLA report, telling them where there's an issue, where the performance has dropped off. So they're aware that there is an issue, but also aware that we're doing something about it. We're looking into this. And it depends. It might be that there's maybe a memory leak, there's a service issue that we can restart. Alternatively, it may be just that we've got additional users on the system, so we need additional resource. So that report can be used for the management team to justify buying additional servers, additional storage, extend the system to meet the system requirements based on the usage. So again, that can be a useful part. The final use case was about volumes. It's about volumes for xECM. And a volume, each different enterprise content management system calls this something slightly different. When we're talking about extended ECM, when we say volume, we're talking about the storage that's available to store content in the background. And again, this is something that's come up that the volume doesn't have adequate storage, but nobody's picked up on that. And when that storage is filled up, the system slows down and can actually the system can fail, and we're into a Sev1 issue again if the volumes haven't got enough storage to store the backend content. So it's a really important element that we've got to be aware of. We've got to understand what the volume size is and what the percentage remaining is on each of those volumes that we're using for the system. So again, going back into our dashboards, we can see here that one of our volumes on server 1 is exceeding the max level that we've got for that particular server. So the percentage used has gone above. I think on this instance it was 85%, or no, sorry, 90% we've defined. Now it has gone up and it's gone down, so maybe we've got some back-end jobs that are running to tidy that. It might be deleting documents from the system, or it might be systems based on a records management piece being taken from the system. But it's still flagging up that we need to do something about that, because again, if the volume gets to 100%, the system will fail. So in this instance, if we look at what we're doing from the proactive jobs point of view, we're putting in a request. So you can see here, there's we've raised a ticket in an external system to request additional storage. So you might not leave it till 90%. What's more likely is if it gets to something like 70, 75%, you'll raise a ticket at that time. If the ticket's not been resolved when it gets to 80 or 90%, again, you can raise a higher severity issue for that and flag that to a different set or a different member. So it might be initially it goes to the admin team, the ticket's raised automatically. But if that ticket's not worked on and the storage is not provided, when it gets to 90%, it could be the management team's notified that this is an issue, because the severity has gone up, because we're getting close to that point where the volume's full and the system may fail. So it's important to make sure the right people at the right time know. And again, on this, you can send out a report to show all the volume, all the percentage usage on all of the volumes, to ensure as soon as that starts to occur, we can also look at the other systems to see if we may need additional storage, not just on one environment, but multiple environments. So again, just going back through that, just to reflect on what we've looked at. The first one was the xECM service, or extended ECM service, being down, and that being indicated in multiple ways. Either physically the server is down, it's not available, or alternatively the service is not processed in the way you'd expect, whether that's around performance, whether it's around tasks being processed. But we've picked it up in multiple ways, and the ability then to restart it. And the next one was full text indexing. So if we're not processing the full text indexing queue in the way we'd expect, flagging that up and restarting the indexing service. Next one was performance. It was like if we're looking at the average transaction performance time dropping below a certain level, flagging that up, but in that case, not actually doing something physical on the system, but sending out a KPI or an SLA report to the management team so they're aware of that performance issue. and at least making sure that we're aware, we know exactly what's happening and how that might affect the business in the background. And then finally, volumes or storage on the back end, ensuring that we've always got adequate storage. So as soon as we get to a certain percentage used on a particular volume, we're flagging that up so storage can be requested. And again, having that ability to maybe at 70% define it as a warning, at 80 or 90% define it as a SEV2, SEV3 issue. So we're making sure the priority is right. As we're getting closer to the system going down because we haven't got enough storage, we need to be aware of that. We need to be able to do something about it. In that instance, it was raising a ticket to request additional storage.